Hi everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how to make the pond for all of the little fish we made last week. So this is really fun when you get to, I think it's fun, is when you get to create the pond, because it means you can start putting everything together and see it all come to life. What I'm showing you today is how to make it in two different styles, the pond. And how to make is this one, where it has smooth edges. It has little pebbles inside and some other stuff, but overall the outside and edges of the pond are smooth. And then the other kind I'll be showing you how to make is one more like this with little pebbles along the outside. And I'll be showing you how to make it in two different sizes. Some that'll fit fish like this one, like I made last week, and some that are more on size for the ones that I normally use. So comparison for you. It's the same process, whether it's really small or really large for the pond size. So here's what you'll need. One that I've been using a lot recently is the original Sculpey granite color, like this one. I like it because it comes in such a large block. So that way, if I did do bigger ponds like this one, which is probably about 2 inches long this way, it works up a lot quicker. It's easy to condition, which makes it a lot easier when you have to roll out the pieces and everything like that. The other one that I use a lot for these, especially these smaller ones and like ones that I customize for people, is Premo Sculpey in their granite color. It's the Premo granite. It comes out a lot more translucent almost and more realistic in color. For all the different types of granite clays, or if you chose a solid color, is just how you want it to look. If you want it more translucent, you could use the Premo color, or if you want it more opaque, you can use the original Sculpey or the Granite granite color. I think it's the Sahara granite that I have. I only have one of them, but I can't find the package, so I'm not sure on the name. But like always, I'll list out the colors that I've used in the video to show you. And for the accessories, we can add all sorts of things. To me, it's easy to make the accessories that we want to add for the pond before we put all of it together. That way, some parts of it can be baked or pre-baked, which is just baking for a shorter amount of time before you put a full project together. And the reason for that is just so if we want to change stuff around, move it around, it's not going to end up smushing what we made. So for one of the accessories that I usually like to add to my koi ponds or my frog ponds, if you choose to do it with those, are lily pads. So I use this color, usually Spanish Olive Premo, for the lily pads. You can make them lighter, darker, whatever. And then, so along with those, I usually like to add little flowers. This one I like using the most. It's called Ballet Pink. I believe it's Premo, but it could be Souffle, but Sculpey anyway. I usually like having that light pink with like a violet color like this. I don't know if you can see that one too good. Then another color I like using a lot lately, it has a nice yellow tone while it's still being a light green. So it does kind of give a more realistic kind of touch to some pieces, is this light lime color from, I believe it's Premo. And then I have this coral color that I'll also show you how to make the little flowers. The amount of time that it takes to make the ponds really just depends on how much you want to add to it and everything like that. Because you can always, like I said, you can have the little pebbles just on the inside, the outside, both. You can add, if I can, I'll edit in a photo of one that I made over the summer, and I etched in like little details to look like rocks along the outside rather than sculpting them. So let's get started. There's no exact size that you have to make the outside of the pond or anything like that. Now granted, in all three of these ponds, they're all about, the fish are kind of different in size, more so these two to this. But you can see that the amount of space that you want either in between them, on every side, it's up to you. One thing, if you're gonna add more than one, that I usually try and do is lay them out on the clay first, so I can have an idea of, oh, well, I can have this shape, but let me turn it this way, and still make sure you have enough room for the actual fish that you're going to be using, because I've had that happen a lot where I forget to do that and then one of them gets the boot. So I'm going to start drawing a shape. I usually go for a little bubble kind of. And then I'm going to move the fish. And then sometimes with because the granite colors, because they have that sand in them, it can kind of catch on the blade. So that's something to be careful of when you are cutting it. So if you do want it in an exact shape, just kind of have some gap around the design. So that way, if you have to, you can always kind of file it down a little. But, so here. Depending on how thick you make them and if you wanted to put in the extra time, one thing that can be fun is like a waterfall. That's something I know when I've looked up pictures of koi ponds that people actually have. A lot of them tend to have like a mini waterfall, like in a corner or a side of it. So you can always like add that by kind of building up a wall of clay and then have the water pour down. The other way you can do that is if you use resin for the water. I don't usually use the resin as water anymore in my ponds just because I don't really have the ventilation for it. But if you do, it's always an option. And cut around the shape of your pond. This is one way to do it anyway. To get it more along however far you want it to be. Like that. If you have a clay that's really dry, you can always add some of the bacon bond down onto this layer, the thicker layer. But I don't think I really need it today. If you left the pond at where it is now, you can turn this into a little pool also. So I'm gonna eventually end up blending the seam of that down. The other way you can add it is if you had any strip of clay, if you had it like this, so it still has a shape to it, but that's okay. We can make it about as thick as we want, like that, and then attach it to the other ponds as we need. And then doing that can also add more thickness to some areas that maybe you weren't thinking of having it look like that originally. All right, so I changed a little bit how I want the bigger ponds to be, because once I added the sides onto it, it looked extremely small for the size of the fish. So that happens sometimes. Once you start adding the walls onto them, it can look either too big, too small, and you can always make changes. I always just prefer to find those changes or choose to make those changes before I add things like the pebbles and stuff. So I'm gonna redo everything, recut it along the way. I do prefer the like rounded side, so I'm just gonna push that in a little. So I might, because of the way it's facing, might have it like that. Okay, now I'm back. I did blend on the walls, and I think it looks a lot better. It's not as small, because before with the walls, it ended around here. So obviously they don't need room to swim, but it adds some motion if you can have some space in it. So I'm just smoothing out the edge of this one where the stones will be. And I'm gonna take clay and roll it up. Usually I roll these into like a snake and then cut them down. You could use a clay extruder if you have one to push the clay out and get it more of an even size, but I don't really care if it's even. Once that falls to the bottom of the bottle, I usually apply it in a thin layer all around the edges of where we'll be putting the rocks. So I might add some rocks here, and then some around here, little ones there. And then I'll do about the same on this little one once I have it placed out. This one won't have as many, obviously, because of the size. I'll add some like that. So with the one that we're adding all the stones to, I'll lay that down so it's nice and smooth. And again, in a flat layer so it's not too lumpy. I make a couple of the same size for a while, and then I switch it up, either make them bigger, smaller. This snake of clay is kind of on the thinner side, and because of the size of the pond, the fish, everything, it's gonna need some rocks that are a bit bigger. So having like the little logs of clay, I don't necessarily like using an extruder because you can cut them down into uneven sizes. Roll them into little balls. They don't have to be perfectly circular, because if they are to look like real stones, they're not going to be perfect circles. So you can have like some little odd sides to them, maybe some are a little flat. But either way, I do try to get them at least smooth, just for how I want them to look. Just placing them. I usually try and have them kind of spaced out, so if I have some that are really big, I'll try and put them like once every few, like that. If every little gap, you know, or if there's little gaps here and there, you don't have to fill them. If you want, you can always bake the pond separate and then kind of fill in the gaps with extra clay of the same color. Sometimes, like what would happen for mine is that I might run out of the clay color that I was using. So just using maybe some of that Bake and Bond can help, or a color similar to whatever you were using. Okay, so I rolled out the rest of the rocks for the base of the wall. Some areas do have some like significant gaps in them, so I made some smaller rocks that I'll be fitting in between there. And if you wanted to have extra level of height or depth to it, you can always add more rocks on top of, like kind of sprinkled throughout like that, on top of all the other rocks. I also made some smaller ones over here, and that I'll just add into this pond. Kind of in the same way that I'm going kind of like a bigger one and then a little one. They don't all have to have like the same amount, same placement, anything like that. If you can hear that, that's my dog in the background. And then I'll add one right randomly there. I made a few extra of the bigger ones too to go in the spaces that I had laid out for the inside of this. And the reason why you can always do that too is it kind of makes it look like it's carrying over. If you want, another thing is for the areas that are exposed a bit, It will be covered with the liquid clay when we add the water. But if you don't like how the edges look on the inside of the pond, you can always blend those down. So one way that I like to secure the rocks, if you do it like this style of pond, is once you can pre-bake the pond. So if you bake it for a few minutes at the correct temperature, like I was mentioning before, you can take it out, and once it's done pre-baking, you can add another layer of that bacon bond over the rocks and in between any of those little spaces, as well as if you wanted to fill any of those gaps with extra clay. So now moving on to the extra accessories. I'm going to take my green, cut off a little chunk. Now with these, the good thing is you can always add like stripes, not stripes, but little sticks of the green clay. This too you can pre-bake. If you pre-bake the little stems, because it kind of looks like a grass almost. If you wanted it to stick out from the water like that, you can always pre-bake the stem. And then before you pre-bake the pond, you can stick in the stem so it stands up like that. I'm not gonna bake these just now, so they will kind of bow down as they bake, but that's okay. Just use the end of my knife to roll it out really thin. Now for the lily pads, most of the time I do them in circle shapes to look like real ones, but you can always do it and kind of have fun with it and either make it look like a flower, maybe a star, do a heart shape. I make a couple dots there, one dot here, maybe one here, and then one here. I think maybe two here and one here. And those will all just be little stems into the little stems. Now you could add all of this extra stuff into the little smoother ponds. I just tend to like it how it looks better in the ones that have all the rocks, because it looks makes it look a little bit more natural. One thing too that's you can always do is with the rocks is if you wanted them to not look so kind of separated and want them to look more melded together, is use your dotting tool and lightly push into each rock and kind of melts them together. You can always add for more depth into the rocks or into the pond, whether it's a smooth type or not, is if you use pastels or paint, you can always add some in between the little rocks. You could either have it be the color of the rocks to make it give more like shadow and depth, like I said, or you could have it look more, say, mossy. It's been out in the wild, almost magical looking. I can add some moss to it by either doing it with clay, which I'll show you in a minute how to do that, or just with paint by adding like browns and green. Take the either a dotting tool or a needle tool like this one, and from the center of the circle I just brush out little lines, and that kind of gives it a more realistic texture. Most times you won't see these because they are at the bottom, but I like adding the detail anyway. You don't have to add it if you don't want, but it's a nice little touch. If the lines get too deep in them, what I usually just do is just lightly push on them like I just did, because it just softens it out again. So it's not so harsh. And if you want some with the like kind of the typical look of a little piece taken out, you just cut a little triangle. You can either put the blade all the way to the center of the lily pad or about a third to halfway, and then you cut at an angle, another little triangle. I usually cut the triangle out of them. You don't have to, but for me, it looks more recognizable. And then that way too, if I don't add all of them to each pond, I can at least have it for another one. So because this pond is going to be so big, I'm going to add these little ones to it. Now I'm adding some of these now. I'm not going to add all of the lily pads, and that's because I want some to sit on top of the water that will add, but I want some to be able to be seen from the bottom. So I'm going to add those in. And then same on this one. This one is a lot more shallow, so it's okay if we add them all. It's just gonna have two. But it's okay if it's not at the very top, because it won't be as thick of water that you have to add. So these probably would float to the bottom anyway, if we did add them like that. So I'm gonna leave this one off to the side, and we'll add that once that one bakes, or once we add the water. So I'm gonna show you how to add moss, or make it look like moss. It can kind of look like some forms of grass I've seen on Pinterest, which that also would start in the ponds. As much as I've enjoyed them, I think it's a dangerous move to have gone on Pinterest so much when I do, because I'll spend hours on there. So if you want moss, take a clump of whatever color you want it in. Usually I'll do it the same color as the rest of the stuff, but make a bunch of little dots. Similar, it's the way you make the moss is similar to how we added the color to the fish with the clay. So when you make all these little circles and push down, and you start pulling at it, and it creates these little chunks of color like that. You can add this either in between rocks, at the base here. I might do it around like the grass, so it looks like it's growing out of something. And with either the smaller side of a dotting tool or a needle tool, you're gonna start from the center and make little dots all around. And the more dots you add, you're gonna add deeper little spots along the edges. And that's just to create more of a not so perfectly round shape. And it almost kind of looks like a, depending on the design you do, like if you go in a spiral, if you change up the size of the dotting tool. I like to start with the smaller one. It almost starts to look like a hydrangea, kind of. And then depending on how flat you make the flower get, it can look more like a lotus or lily flower. If you make this big enough, don't worry if it does kind of look like cauliflower, because it can look like that. But the smaller you make them, and then also if you're not looking to make it smaller, the more little spots and you add, the more it'll look like a flower. So usually the more dots I have, like I said, you can go press the little dot tool deeper. And then usually what I like to do at the end is get the center pushed down a little, and then I'll take something lighter, either yellow, this light lime color, white, or depending on if the flower I'm making is white, then I might use pink or this lime color. Usually I just go for whatever the opposite of it is. So I'm just gonna add a little piece of that towards the middle, and I'm gonna make that same dot thing, motion I mean, and then make it look like that so it looks more like a lily. So I'll show you up close. I think it turned out really nice. So if you have a hard time kind of recreating shapes like that, what you can always do too is if you had a way to make a mold of it. I don't normally have that available to me, so I just make each one by hand, but you can always do that as an option. So because I'll have these flowers go on top or sit towards the top, I'll leave them on the side along with the lily pads. I'll make some in different sizes so they can go in this pond as well. All right, so I'm back. I made quite a few lilies. I made them in the pink and the lime color. I also made 2 in this coral color, and I thought that even if I don't use it for either of these ponds, I'll definitely use them for a future pond because I really love how bright it looks. It's real summery. But I think from where I am, I'm all set with how many accessories I've made, and I really like where the ponds are at right now. So I think I'm gonna end it here, and I'll see you again next week. I hope see you again next week, or when I show you how we can add all the pieces together and finally have our finished ponds. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.